Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ADA compliance webinar. Thank you so much for attending. Our goal today is making the Americans with Disabilities Act and its requirements as digestible as possible for you, specifically in regard to drinking fountains, okay? Keep top of mind as I move through the presentation that the requirements that I'm about to cover apply to a lot more than just drinking fountains, a bunch of other things. I mean, from baby changing tables to fire alarms, etc. But our focus is drinking fountains. Also consider that all of you have your own state and local laws to adhere to, so ensure that those are taken into consideration as well. State and local standards must be more strict than what is currently in place at the federal level, which is what we're covering today. The federal standard for compliance. My name is Justin Dunn. I'm the Senior Field Marketing Specialist here at Haas. I've been here about 8 years, specialize in the ADA, ANSI standards, and communication of those requirements. And with me is Hayden. Do you want to say hi real quick?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I'm Hayden Delgado. I'm a Field Marketing Specialist with Haas, and I've been with Haas now for about 5 years.
He's going to be handling a portion of the webinar and making sure that this all goes smoothly behind the scenes. Now, as we progress through the webinar, please, if you have them at any time, post your questions during the presentation. We'll using the questions section on the control panel. Any questions that aren't addressed during the Q&A at the end of the webinar, Hayden is going to start adding those to the back end of the webinar as we progress, so that we can answer them for you, as many as we can get to. So be sure to submit those. We're going to launch poll questions. There's only 5 of them. They're spread out through the webinar, but they really help us out, myself and Hayden specifically, to cater this to your needs and get some understanding of what those needs are. And so we really appreciate your participation in those. And they'll be launched again throughout the presentation. A follow-up email is going to be sent to you. It'll take about 24 to 48 hours. It depends on how many questions there are, how complicated they are, because I have to dig in and type out and make sure I really get all those answered for you. But that follow-up email is going to include the on-demand recording, presentation slides, additional support materials. It will also have the instructions on how to get your CEUs, okay, ABIH, AIA, ASPE. ASPE, if you're going to attend, we'll see you there. And then it will also include the Q&A, a full breakdown Excel spreadsheet of the questions that were asked and the answers given by yours truly. Now for the quick history lesson portion of the webinar, just a bit about us, and then I'll explain the agenda, and then a bit about the ADA and its origins, just so you understand where this is all coming from. Now, our founder, Luther Haas, invented the world's first sanitary drinking fountain bubbler head back in 1906 amidst the ban the cup movements and so on, and formed the Haas Sanitary Drinking Fountain Company in 1909 in Berkeley, California. Luther was working as a sanitation inspector for Berkeley when he had the thought to invent a device that would prevent users from spreading germs and disease through public hydration. And that device was the drinking fountain bubbler head. Pre-Luther and his invention, it was very commonplace to see public fountains with constant running water, which isn't so uncommon in the rest of the world today. And attached or anchored to that fountain via a chain was a cup. And you would pick up that cup and have yourself a drink, and then drop the cup, and the next person would use it. And this had obvious public sanitation issues. Some of the common diseases being spread were cholera, typhoid fever, dysentery, all of which potentially fatal and spread from mouth to cup at the time. Now, lucky for us, Luther put his inventive mind to the task, and he found a solution for all of us, and that has continued to benefit public health and safety to this day. Fun fact, his first prototype was actually a brass bedpost off of his bed. And today, Haas is located in Sparks, Nevada, and we are still working tirelessly to improve the health and safety of our global community. Now, the agenda today consists of the overview of the ADA legislation for drinking fountains, common ADA installation issues that you will or may have run into in public, and we'll discuss what those look like, ADA compliant drinking fountains and bottle filler installations, so you see what it should look like, hygienic hydration solutions covered by Hayden, and then we'll end with the ADA Q&A and towards the end of the webinar. Now, first and foremost, before we really get into it, as I mentioned, the history lesson continues after the agenda. It's important to remember that this is civil rights legislation, right? Prior to the standard and its inception, accessibility was really up to the individual businesses and was infrequently available to people that didn't want to spend the money to update and thought that, you know, your handicap was your problem, which was, I mean, probably on a board counter protest back then. There were no teeth in any requirements to provide access to buildings and grounds for an entire class of people that were being very heavily neglected. But thanks to people like Justin Dart, founder of Dart Industries, responsible for such brands as Duracell, Tupperware, and so on, he was one of the biggest advocates for the movement and is often referred to as the grandfather of the ADA, as he himself was in fact disabled. Alongside fellow advocates and Mr. George H.W. Bush, who was the sitting president that signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law on July 26, 1990. And this new act granted reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities and prohibited discrimination based on those disabilities. Now, it's a very cool story, and it would be hard to believe now, but they were met with strong resistance to these proposed changes. There were protests, counter protests. They had demonstrations like the Capitol Crawl. They had about 60 plus something demonstrators that abandoned their wheelchairs, crawled up the steps of the Capitol to show how inaccessible the building was, and once they reached the top, demanded to meet with the Speaker of the House. In another instance, while protesting the Transportation Association, I believe in Canada actually, the police showed up to arrest the protesters, but in a funny and, well, I think it's funny, only because I'm a nerd for this stuff, but an ironic twist, didn't have accessible paddy wagons to obtain or to transport them into custody. So they had to go obtain accessible school buses to get them to the station. The Public Transit Authority was actually one of the groups that fought hardest against regulations for accessibility, and really only ended up slowing down progress a bit through lobbying efforts, which led to the aforementioned Capitol Crawl, which was in response to that bill getting stuck without signature. And then lastly, that fresh ink needed on that legislation. Here's actually the photo of HW signing the bill into law alongside Justin Dart himself on the right there. And he even added a nice note to the famous photo, thanking Mr. Dart for his efforts and friendship there. Okay, so with the history lesson out of the way, let's get poll question number 1 going. Hayden, if you would, please.
Our first poll question today is, what are you looking to obtain from this webinar? For this question, you can select as many that apply to you as possible. The options are basic ADA compliance guidance, product recommendations, COVID hygienic solutions and best practices, and CEU credits. While we're giving everybody some time to answer this question, I would also like to reiterate what Justin said earlier. If you have any questions, please submit them. I'll try to answer all the ones that I can, but anything that I can't answer will be included in the follow-up email. All right, thank you everyone for the participation.
All right, moving on. We are getting into it. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, 28 CFR Part 36, Title 3, regarding public accommodations and commercial facilities and its requirements are enforced by none other than the DOJ, the Department of Justice. Title 3 is going to be our entire focus today. And the following are the key sections of the standard pertaining to drinking fountains and their compliance. Also, remember that Hayden is going to send out the slides to everyone after the presentation so you can reference them later on, okay? And quickly, since I always get asked, Title 2, that covers state and local government, and Title 1 has more to do with anti-discrimination of disabled employees. So I want to kick this off by starting talking about section 36.403, which gives us a list of priorities when making alterations to provide accessibility in a facility. And you're going to notice that in this list, drinking fountains take a pretty high priority, and alarms on their parking, storage, fountain, public telephones, restrooms, the route, all of those things. All high priority items and basic human necessities when navigating the world. All walks of life, people everywhere. Obviously, we need water. It's right at the top of the list of things we need to survive, and we need to ensure that it's as accessible to everybody as possible, right? Now, Chapter 1, Section 102 just lets us know that this document contains both adult and children's height requirements based on average human anthropometrics, which is just the measurements, capabilities of the human body. Children are defined as 12 or younger in the ADA. Now, Chapter 2 explains that where there's one fountain, typically a high side fountain, that there must be 2 fountains. Okay, local building codes would determine the number of drinking fountains that must be installed based on occupancy. This simply states that there must be a high side fountain and a low side fountain. What most people don't understand is that the low side fountain is not the only one designed for people with disabilities. The high side fountain is also a disabled accessible fountain, designed for those with bending, stooping disabilities that may be utilizing a walker, cane, or crutches, and may not be physically able to utilize that low side fountain. So other than just aesthetics, drinking fountains really aren't designed for able-bodied people. It's reasonable to assume that if you are able-bodied, that you can take a drink of whichever fountain it is that you choose to take a drink from. So if you're installing a single fountain in your facility or in a park, you must satisfy this requirement and install a second fountain along with that. They don't even need to be next to each other. They can be separated either side of a hallway, but both must be present and easily accessible. Now, 211.3, this is referred to as the 50-50 rule. That's an easy way to remember it, the 50-50 rule. And it simply states that half of the units installed are going to be high fountains, and the other half are going to be low fountains. So just a quick example, if you're installing 6 new fountains in your building, you couldn't do 4 high fountains and 2 low fountains. You have to provide 3 high and 3 low. Okay, that's the basis of this rule. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. You have to do a 50-50 unless there's a fraction, and then you're welcome to do whatever you want with that last fountain. So if you had 3 and 3 and a 7th fountain, you could do whatever you want with that 7th fountain. That could be high, low, it's entirely up to you. In Chapter 3, we start getting into dimensional and mechanical elements. You're going to hear me use that term a lot throughout the entire presentation. An element can be any of the devices that we're granting access to. This could be a drinking fountain, phone, fire extinguisher, baby changing table, and so on. Many of the measurements that we're about to cover again, covered a lot more than just drinking fountains, but that's our focus. This is one of the most important measurements to remember, and probably one of the easiest ones. and frequently the section that's being violated in tear-outs and reinstalls. 305.3 and 305.5 detail the clear ground space to accommodate the wheelchair underneath the fountain, allowing an approach that's unobstructed to the fountain. You have to provide a 30-inch by 48-inch space of clearance underneath the element, okay, which is just larger than your typical adult-sized wheelchair, giving the user clear space for the wheelchair and for their hands to maneuver the wheelchair into that space if it's a manually operated wheelchair. Here's an example clearly demonstrating the clear ground space in front of the element. In this case, a telephone and a fire extinguisher. 305.5 explains the positioning of this clear ground space, allowing for either a forward approach, like the one you see, or on the left, or a parallel approach, as you see on the right-hand side there. Now remember that all of these measurements are minimum requirements, okay? The more space you can provide in this area, the better. When the element is in an alcove, like in the examples above, wheelchair users are going to need additional space to get around and maneuver. And the clear floor space changes based on both the depth of the alcove and the type of approach that you're attempting. So in our first example there, our 30 by 48 inches becomes 36 by 48 inches when the depth of that alcove exceeds 24 inches deep. And in the second example, for a parallel approach, which is a bit more complicated, when the depth of the alcove exceeds 15 inches, then our clear floor space must be 30 by 60 inches. And more states are requiring the use of alcoves. And it just makes sense for these elements to be out of the path of travel, and you have a separate space for these types of elements in a building, and have them more privately accessible off to the side. Now, extending up from the clear ground space that we've defined is our toe and knee clearance. So try to think of this clear area that you see there, the yellow area, as a three-dimensional space. Our toe clearance is 9 inches from the ground to the bottom of the element, and our knee clearance is 27 inches from the ground up. Obstructions in this yellow highlighted area are another unfortunately common compliance issue. I've got some great examples coming up that we've found out in the wild that I'll show you. This space underneath must be clear, and that includes any space between the victim's knees. So think like P-traps, old school hanging phone books, anything else that you might be able to think of. This space is unusable. We're not allowed to use that space. Which brings us to poll question number 2. Hayden, if you would.
Our next poll question today is, how likely are you to purchase, retrofit, specified touchless hydration products post-pandemic? Again, you can select as many that apply to you as possible, and the options are extremely likely, very likely, somewhat likely, or not at all likely. Give everybody a little bit of time to answer the questions. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Hayden. And moving on, we're going to get into 307. So section 307 pertains to protruding objects and is primarily in place to protect another type of protected class that we haven't touched on yet, and that class is the vision impaired. Now, elements may only protrude into a walkway so much and must be located at certain heights, whether they are in an alcove or not. This is to prevent anyone from running into those elements, whatever they are. Now, objects with their leading edge at the or the lowest point on the front of the element above 27 inches may only protrude a maximum of 4 inches into the path of travel. But so long as the leading edge of that element is at or under 27 inches, then this is considered to be detectable by a detection cane, according to the DOJ. So in this example, this is one of my favorite layouts. I think this really clearly explains what it is that we're, visualizes what we're trying to explain here. And in this example, we've got our gentleman there in the hallway, navigating the hallway. On the bottom right, we see an object very similar to a drinking fountain. And so long as that its leading edge is at or below that 27-inch line, it can be detected using a detection cane and early enough to be avoided to avoid potential injury. Okay, this fountain and any element, so long as it is meeting that 27-inch requirement, can protrude any amount into this space. Okay, the same rule applies for elements at or above 80 inches from the floor. This is considered headroom clearance. And similar to the previous example, can extend any amount into that space. Now on the left, we have an object sitting above 27 inches and below 80 inches, squarely inside of that zone we just defined, and therefore may not protrude into the space more than 4 inches from the wall, unless it's a handrail. There is an exception, an included exception for handrails, and that they get to extend 4.5 inches, just to make design-wise and for our hand more comfortable to use, and so on. Now I'm going to use our 1011 HPS and SK3 cane skirt. You can see it there on the left for this next example. This is a dual high-low unit. You typically see this in like a high traffic customer facing area since it's so shiny. And it's a great example of what your typical high-low ADA installation looks like. So the SK3 cane skirt is our primary focus here, where drinking fountains cannot be alcoved out of the path of travel, right? A cane skirt needs to be used to lower the leading edge of the high side fountain down to 27 inches to also make that side detectable. Now, when using a detection cane, if unassisted, you are generally following what is referred to as like a shoreline or the outermost edge of a space. And since the visually impaired may need to detect something on either side of the room, they may be traveling in either direction, and without the cane skirt in place, there will be instances where people will run into the high side fountain, or they'll have a difficult time finding or detecting it early enough to avoid collision with it, which is why we use the cane skirt. Now, many states still don't fully utilize alcoves, and until they do, the cane skirt or the cane curb, there's a curb version that goes on the floor, are the answer to this issue. Now, section 308 covers our reach ranges. Another important requirement when something like a bottle filler is installed, or when things like baby changing stations are put in place, the slide is pretty straightforward. If your reach is unobstructed, like in the photo on the left, then you have a 48-inch max and 15-inch minimum reach range. Any buttons, handles, sensors, etc. have to be located within this range. But as soon as we introduce an obstruction, our reach ranges are diminished, obviously. When an object shorter than 20 inches is in place, we keep our 48-inch high reach range, but we lose the lower reach range for obvious reasons. The fountains are away. Now, when reaching over an object that is 20 to 25 inches, our high reach range is shortened to only 44 inches. All right, makes sense. Generally speaking, drinking fountains are shorter than 20 inches. So the middle example will be what our reach ranges are going to be, usually. Remember, we want to make things as easy as possible and not create a challenge for the people trying to utilize this device, whatever it is. Now, this is a DOJ advisory, and it defines reach ranges for children based on age, right? Now, remember, children are defined as ages 12 and under in the ADA. These are all ranges that apply to both forward and parallel approach to an element. Starting on the left-hand side, there it shows our forward or side reach range, high and low. Obviously, as they grow, their arm reach grows as well, extending their reach. Ages over 12 are expected to utilize adult height drinking fountains. The only places you'll typically find children's fountains in use is the school system, daycare facilities, and similar facilities where many children are supervised by fewer adults, right? Now in public, the expectation is that an adult is present to assist their child with using fountains or other elements if needed. Now, in Chapter 6, we get into specifics regarding plumbing elements and their measurements. First off, 602.2 covers clear floor space and the necessity to have that clear floor space centered on the unit, not on the alcove. This is for a forward approach, as a parallel approach needs to be set up a bit differently. Obviously, our toe and knee clearance must also still be available under the equipment. There is an exception included here for parallel approaches to children's use units, allowing a parallel approach so long as the bubbler or spout is at a certain height and depth. Knee and toe clearance begins to diminish pretty quickly as we lower fountains for children's use. So the use of a parallel approach is an important option to have, right? Now, especially considering that children's use wheelchairs are sometimes adult wheelchairs. Custom-sized wheelchairs can be pretty expensive and they can be pretty quickly outgrown. Given that our kids they grow like weeds, so a parallel approach can really help to solve that issue. So you're leaning over the side rather than going for a forward approach and trying to get your toes and knees and the device underneath the fountain. Now, here's a really good illustration. This is one of my favorites of floor space and how they need to be centered on the elements themselves. Now, as far as the fountain goes, since the clear floor space is intended for the wheelchair user, it's centered on the left low side fountain. And since there's no real floor space defined in black and white for the high side, the floor space can spill over under the high side fountain area as much as is needed. Now, many make the mistake of centering the clear floor space on the alcove and on the unit as a whole rather than the low side fountain, which can lead to expensive tear outs and redesigns down the road. Okay, so we want to make sure it's centered on that low side fountain. And to be fair, there is a defined floor space for the high side, but it's more of a generally agreed upon rule, and I'll go over it a little bit later. Okay, now here you can see we have a total width 48 inches in this alcove, wall to wall. It is not deeper than 24 inches, so we don't need to expand on our 30-inch floor space like we discussed earlier. You will notice that it shows a separate measurement for California. Now, California has gone above that standard and its requirements and mandated an additional 2 inches of floor space, bumping up the width of our floor space to 32 inches. So long as, again, state requirements go above and beyond the federal standards, they can supersede them. Now, centering the fountain is not mandatory, by the way, but it does make the installation more aesthetically pleasing to passerbys and people using it and the design of the building. If the alcove was deeper than 24 inches, remember that we would need a total of 36 inches of ground clearance to allow for more maneuverability on a forward approach. For California, we have our 32 inches and 30 inches elsewhere centered on the low side fountain. Center line to center line, these fountains are separated by 16 inches, which means we need an additional 16 inches of space on either side of the fountains total to meet our 32-inch minimum for California. And really, without the additional 2 inches for California, an alcove that is 4 inches smaller total, right? Now, 2 inches less on each side to keep it centered in that alcove, which again is not mandatory. Now, since there are no obstructions under the high side fountain, our primary concern is that wall. Now, remember, if it is at all intruding into our clear floor space, the alcove would need to be redesigned, or you could simply take the fountain, shove it to the side so that the high side fountain is closer to the alcove wall, giving us the clear floor space that we are required to provide on the low side fountain. Okay. Now, doing so will leave it a little off center, but we should remember that the high side is also for those with disabilities, and they may need the assistance of walkers, crutches, and so on. And we need to leave room for that equipment to be used with no more effort than it typically requires. To be fair and sure, there is an agreed upon, again, number for that high side, and I'll cover it here in a little bit when we get to the outdoor fountains, okay? But the priority is always that that low side fountain is accessible, even if the fountain needs to be a little off center. Poll question number 3. Again, we really, really appreciate your participation here.
Has your facility updated hydration options due to COVID? Again, select all that apply. No change. We've deactivated all drinking fountain bubblers. We've added touchless features to all fountains, and we've added bottle filling stations. This question really tells us what the market needs right now and makes sure that we're putting the right things out there. This is one of my favorite questions for that reason. So as much participation as we could get would be really appreciated. Thank you. Still have quite a few answers coming in, so I'm going to give it a few more seconds than usual on this one. Okay, thank you, everyone.
So many people participating in that. Thank you very much. We, again, is appreciated by both Hayden and I. This is an excerpt from the California Building Code, the CBC, and what they have done, along with Texas and many other states, is that they've made it mandatory to locate all drinking fountains in alcoves or within wing walls to ensure they don't impede into pedestrian walkways. These protected areas have to be 32 inches wide, 18 inches deep minimum. Wing walls basically just act like an alcove, where an alcove can't be installed and has to be retrofitted into place usually. The wing walls must also project horizontally at least as far as the drinking fountain. And while we're on the topic of Chapter 6, I should bring up that the flow of water must also be within compliance with the equipment, from the equipment. The height of the stream of water must be at least 4 inches tall to allow for a bottle or glass to be filled for those who may be incapable of leaning over the fountain to take a drink. It also makes it a lot easier for someone to use it in general. I mean, you know, I side-eye fountains where it's like barely dribbling out. I'm not going to put my mouth on the bubbler. I want it spraying 4 inches high, so it's nice and easy. And we've all done that awkward like glass bottle tip to try to fill, you know, a bottle up at the drinking fountain. So having a nice tall stream on that definitely helps. Just a quick tip: Haas drinking fountains are front adjustable from the button. So if you take a small flathead or a small tool, insert it into the button and the hole in the center and turn, you can increase the flow of the fountain without completely disassembling it and trying to get to the valve on the inside. Okay, so here we have an interesting example we'd found a while back. This issue here is a bit obvious, I think, hopefully to everybody. In this installation, we have the low side installed on the right-hand side there, and a large, I'm told, gas line obstructing our toe and knee clearance under the fountain. This could be easily fixed just by swapping the two fountains so that the clear floor space on the left is being used with the low side fountain. So long as there's 30 inches or 32 inches, again for California, between the gas line and the wall on the left, then we'd be just fine here. Now over to children's use for just a second. Section 602.2 gives us the maximum bubbler height of 30 inches and a 3.5-inch maximum depth for the bubbler from the front edge of the fountain. This also allows us to forego our previously mentioned knee and toe clearance, since we can lower the fountain where the users are intended to be children. There will need to be a parallel approach and space for that available though for that installation. Many states have their own requirements for children's height and an approach preference. Wow, I could barely spit that out of my mouth. And an approach preference. There we go. So be sure to reference those local requirements before pulling, Justin said so type of maneuver. Now, many states still allow for a parallel approach for children's fountains and require a front approach. Some even specify their own knee and toe clearance. And with that said, we'll move on to a few more examples now that everyone is thoroughly confused. Now, this one, excellent installation here. I'm not sure what was going on. This was a more recent one that we found. It was way too close to the wall and obstructing our clear floor space on the left-hand side there. So the left side fountain, your toe and knee clearance is there, but your clear ground space is gone. It's inaccessible. The one on the right, the second from the right there, that is fully accessible. That one's fine. But also our bottle filler. I think it could be a button or sensor activated. It's hard to tell on the photo. I think it's a button. But the activation height for that bottle filler is way too high. More ideally, the high side fountain on the left side and the low side fountain on the left side would have been swapped, and that bottle filler installed, of course, on either of the low fountains to maintain compliance. So lots of issues in this one. So there it is. So our 40, that's our issue right there. That 48-inch max is being exceeded, well above what somebody could easily reach from a wheelchair. And then right there, you could have easily moved the bottle filler to the next fountain to solve at least that issue, but I would still suggest swapping the low and high side on the left side there. Now this, lots wrong here in this photo as well. Their intention was to install a high-low fountain with a third child height fountain in a cascading design. That would have looked really nice. But it's all mixed up and backwards and terrible. It's good looking fountains though. Good looking fountains. Now the issue, firstly, is our clear floor space and knee clearance is being obstructed by what is intended to be the child fountain on the left-hand side, and what should have been the ADA fountain, since it has the longer arm for easier access. Not only is the fountain way too short for our knees and to fit underneath the wheelchair is hitting the fountain on the left for sure. Now the high-low combo unit on the left should have been installed on the right, with our single fountain on the right installed on the left, with enough room between it and the center fountain to meet our 30 inches. And I'll show you exactly how that is done utilizing these. To demonstrate this and how it should have been done, I'm going to use our 1501, 1311 for the example. These are enameled cast iron fountains, heavy duty. You would typically find these in schools, hospitals, and similar areas like that. Now here is basically the mirror image of the example I just showed you, but compliant. The 1311 high-low unit is installed on the left-hand side with 22 inches between the center line of the center fountain or the ADA fountain and the child height fountain on the right, giving us plenty of room for our clear floor space there. That's how it's done. You can see here the outline of the 30-inch space we need for that clear floor space. Right? The high side doesn't offer any obstructions, so we just need to ensure the child height fountain is far enough away that it doesn't interfere with the wheelchair when they approach the fountain. And that's how you would do it right there, folks. Now for another great example, we'll do a quick outdoor example. On the screen is a 3300 FR. Again, great looking fountain, poorly installed. This is a freeze protected unit, you can tell by the buttons, and someone decided to install it way too close to that wall, directly behind it. You can see here, measured out, the clear floor space is obstructed by the wall. You might be able to do like some sort of weird approach to that to maybe get access to it, fill a glass or bottle, but it'd be very difficult to get your mouth up to the bubbler head in this fashion. Definitely needs to be moved away from the wall to make it accessible. Here's another example for outdoor compliance. This fountain, for example, has an adjustable arm that can be adjusted for either adult ADA or child height. These are incredibly uncommon. You see these in public parks, especially because of their ability to accommodate both ADA accessibility and children. When installing these fountains, consideration of the approach and direction of the bubbler head is a super important factor to help ensure compliance, and I'll show you what I mean. Above, this is the 3150. Now, if the 3150 or any other outdoor fountain is installed against a wall, building, railing structure, whatever it happens to be, the center line of the wheelchair accessible fountain needs to be a minimum of 15 inches from the wall to give us our 30 inches of clear ground space. And we'll of course need that 48 inches out from the base of the fountain to allow for easy access to the fountain. So same as indoor installations, we need to have our available knee and toe clearance available underneath that fountain. And lastly, I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but on the bottom middle is our visual representation of that clear floor space I mentioned for the high side fountain. It's 30 inches by 30 inches. Okay, again, this isn't required, but it is a generally agreed upon space necessary for accessibility. And since it's intended for those with stooping or bending disabilities, then we need to assume that, again, they're using a device that will need that clear floor space to make it accessible. Okay, moving on. So common practice in public parks typically is to pour a pad of concrete, specifically for the fountain, to help remove the fountain from the pedestrian walkway. It kind of acts like an alcove and gives users a firm surface to stand on, or for wheelchair users, a firm surface for the wheels to avoid difficulty that dirt or grass would provide. In this example, you can clearly see the path of travel on the left side, which will provide easy access to the low side fountain. If the orientation of the fountain were any different in this exact layout, access to the fountain would be very difficult. To fit the fountain perfectly here, to include both the wheelchair free ground space and high side fountain space, we need a pad that is 69 inches by 52 inches deep and wide respectively, with the low side again facing the path of travel for an easy forward approach. Easy forward approach. Now, different example this time, but with wing walls or guardrails in place, pretty similar to the previous one. All requirements remain the same here for the approach. Still favoring a forward approach since it's the easiest. Unfortunately, many installations prioritize that high side fountain because it probably gets used more frequently. But we have to prioritize that low side. Remember that the guardrails need to extend at least far enough out so that no part of the fountain protrudes outside of the reach of the rails, all in an effort to make sure the unit is more detectable and keep it out of that path of travel. All right. Quick lineup, just to show off some of the models that and different ways and styles for ADA accessible equipment. This is what they look like, specifically in an outdoor setting. But you have the ADA arm, adult height drinking fountain, options for child height sizes and things like that. But this is the type of equipment you're going to run into in those sort of settings. Now, for those of you who may not be aware, the 2010 ADA standards were derived from the ANSI A117.1 2009 standard. The updates that these standards last received included the addition of bottle filling stations to the fountain section, 602, as you see on the screen. Remember, this is an addition. A bottle filler does not replace a drinking fountain, ever, right? You can have as many bottle fillers as you want, but they cannot replace a drinking fountain in your facility, right? Unless you've exceeded your quota for the number of drinking fountains in your building, and can then replace one of them with a bottle filler. So if you have way more than is required by local requirements, then you can replace one, sure. 602.4 indicates that bottle fillers must adhere to 602.4.1 and .2 regarding our clear floor space, which we already discussed, which again is 30 by 48 inches, and that the controls need to be either hand operated or automatic, okay, and be within our reach ranges. I'll go over that in a moment though. There is also an exception on this page stating that the bottle filler is installed on both the high and low side fountains, then the high side does not need to comply with this section, which is due to the fact that our low side fountain bottle filler is accessibly installed. It's pretty rare to see an installation with both unless it's a really busy area, like high traffic area. And with that in mind, if a bottle filler is not installed on both fountains, which is generally the case, then the one bottle filler must be located on the low side fountain to allow access to wheelchair bound people, since if the bottle filler is on the low side, we can ensure that everyone can reach it. And if located on the high side, we're going to make access to that bottle filler very difficult for some people. Okay. So next up, I'm going to use our 1920 bottle filler for the next couple examples for compliance. These little devices are retrofittable. You'll find them on everything. And it makes ADA compliance or upgrades to ADA compliance very easy. So these types of devices you'll run into in public spaces, and they're great for those retrofit type areas and fountains that need an upgrade, but it has to be done correctly, right? We of course include instructions, but sometimes people throw away instructions. Now, so the 1117 LNH02 with the 1920 bottle filler over the low side fountain, accessible to everybody, well within reach ranges. All we need to ensure here is that the touchless button on the front there is reachable, and the activator is either hand operated or automatic. In this case, it's automatic. The bottle rest is an excellent addition, allowing for someone to put their bottle down and use just one hand for activation, which is ideal if you're considering those with prosthetic limbs or someone who may need the extra hand to maneuver a wheelchair, okay? In accordance with 308.2.2, the bottle filler is located at 46 inches, which is below the required 48 inches we covered earlier. Remember, this is a maximum height, and since it's a maximum height, the activator can be located anywhere between the fountain and the bottle filler, not just below the fountain. So since we have an obstruction to our lower reach range, if there was no fountain installed and maybe just a bottle filler, we can install the activator as low as 15 inches, technically, based on our reach ranges, but that would be pretty impractical. Remember that we get 48 inches reach here because the installed fountain is not exceeding 20 inches from the wall. Most fountains are about 18 to 20 inches. If an element was in place that fell into that 20 to 25 inch reach range, then keep in mind that our reach range goes down to only 44 inches, as we mentioned earlier. Now here we have just a single 1311 fountain that could easily be used as our third child height fountain or as a standalone ADA fountain. And guess what? Or a high side fountain, all depending on your facility, its needs, and how you're designing the area, that's all. Now, speaking of child height, remember children are defined as age 12 and under. Here we are utilizing the age range of 9 to 12. Our maximum reach range would be 44 inches. The bubbler head has to be at a maximum of 30 inches or below for a child height fountain at the spout, not at the top of the bubbler head at the outlet of water. As you can see on the screen, our bottle filler activation is at 42 5/8 inches from the wall, well below the 44-inch max, and the bubbler head is at 30 inches, fully compliant. This is a model 1311. Keep in mind, enameled iron is really important for these installations. As they're non-porous, they're easy to clean, and you're in a wheelchair, you're typically grabbing onto the fountain. They're also in really hot settings, not cooking stainless steel outdoors. It stays a lot cooler. And I think I missed progressing a particular slide, but here, 42 5/8, 30-inch bubbler head, 24-inch knee height. So it could be parallel approach, forward approach, either one to this one, but this is what I was talking about. I think I forget to progress the slide. I got a little carried away, as I do. And now we're going to move on to the Q&A section here in just in a minute. Remember to submit your questions if you've been holding on to them, and we will wrap up the main body of the presentation with poll question number 4.
Our second to last poll question is, what percentage of time do you specify a bottle filler when specifying a drinking fountain? If this is not applicable to you, please do not respond. And the options are 75+%, 50 to 74%, 25 to 49%, 1 to 24%, and 0%. Also, thank you to everybody that submitted questions. We got quite a few questions, so I tried to answer as many as I could get to today. If your question was not answered yet, it will be in that follow-up email.
And Hayden and I here in just a second, he's going to cover a quick topic, and then we're going to fly through the Q&A. We had some great questions. Hayden laid them out for us, and we're going to just fly through those real quick after this.
All right, I'm going to close up this poll question and get into it. So over the past few years, we have really taken an initiative to provide new hygienic and accessible hydration options, which include our touchless electric sensors and our antimicrobial surfaces for sanitary activation. And both of these activation options can be added to both your new and existing units with easy to follow instructions for quick installation out in the field. And then I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about this on the next slide as well. On the left are 2 of our newer units in our electric water cooler collection. The units with bubblers have antimicrobial bubbler heads, and these are all ADA compliant and have several smart features like a counter for bottle save. There's forward thinking energy efficiency. There's the ability to track the filter life, ability to calibrate the touchless sensor, and a purge feature to prevent bacteria buildup such as Legionella. There's also a display code for any error codes just to simplify the troubleshooting process. And these units are easy to install and retrofit over other manufacturers' equipment because they provide a lot of adjustability because of the amount of extra space under the unit as well. They also come with a self-leveling wall mount and an installation template to make it that much quicker of a process as well. In the middle, we have some of our standalone bottle fillers. These are, again, also ADA compliant, and they are ideal for all types of high traffic areas with options for both indoor and outdoor use. And they are constructed of durable stainless steel material to resist stains and corrosion while also being very vandal resistant as well. And then on the right, we have those sanitary activation options I touched on a moment ago. We launched the Haas antimicrobial copper push buttons a few years back because copper it's so broadly recognized for its antimicrobial properties among many industries, especially with healthcare. And there are also our hands-free sensors, which will convert most Haas standard push button units to be touchless hand-free operation, and with just a simple front motion that is in front of the device. And these are available for new and existing units, as I said. Now we're going to hop into our final poll question of the day. That is, would you be interested in learning more about the Haws touchless hydration product? The two options for this are yes, please have someone contact me, and no, thank you.
We also had a couple pre-submitted questions from the webinar email that Hayden added to the Q&A, so we'll be touching on those two on top of your submitted questions.
Okay, Justin, I'm going to go ahead and close this one up. We can hop into that Q&A.
Okay, well, why don't you start us off?
Great. So the first one is, how do I know how many fountains I need for a project? So the number of fountains needed for a project is going to actually be based on your local codes. It's not going to be found in that ADA standard. The building code will determine the number of fountains you need based on things such as the occupancy of the building, the type of the building, and then a few other factors in there as well.
All right, well, let me hop in on this one. So if this one was, if part of a product is not designed for wheelchair accessibility, for example, outdoor drinking fountain with a standing person's fountain and a wheelchair accessible fountain, is there a standing person's clear space requirement that's different from wheelchair clear space? And there is, and we briefly mentioned that in the webinar, this space earlier, and it isn't in any way in black and white in the standard, but it is generally agreed upon that 30 by 30 inch rule to ensure that there's enough standing space big enough for a walker or other device in front of the fountain. But again, it's not an actual inclusion in the standard. This is just something that is generally used to make sure that it's accessible.
Then our next question is it a requirement to have a high and low drinking fountain, or are you able to install just one fountain? For example, if an old single low fountain was removed and replaced with a new one. So the ADA standard does require that no fewer than 2 drinking fountains are provided. One drinking fountain must comply to that wheelchair accessibility, and then the other complying with the standing persons with disability, bending or stooping. And once that minimum requirement is met, you could then add a single drinking fountain of either low or high height as you wish, but not before that is met. And then next we have, can I remove my drinking fountain and replace it with a bottle filler? No, we actually get this question quite a bit, and it's no. Drinking fountains are still required by law. Not everyone has a bottle filler or a cup, so they wouldn't be able to utilize that bottle filler, although it does seem like that is the preference nowadays. Drinking fountains still need to remain so that folks without those devices have access to water, and water is a basic human necessity, so making sure that we all have that easy access is incredibly important. Does the chiller on an electric water cooler interfere with knee clearance? The way that the chiller is actually designed is in accordance with the ADA standard, and many of the examples Justin actually showed throughout the webinar today were electric water coolers and not your typical drinking fountain. They provide the necessary toe and knee clearance even with that chiller located beneath the fountain itself. What makes copper antimicrobial? Are the Haws copper valve buttons just copper? Copper and its alloys, which are brass, bronze, and copper nickel, are inherently antimicrobial. When those alloys are cleaned regularly, the frequently touched surfaces are going to continuously kill bacteria that cause infections. And then for the second part of that question, the Haws copper valve buttons are made of 99.9% copper plating. Are there separate regulations for touchless water dispensers? Touchless water dispensers must follow the same regulations as a normal drinking fountain. There are no exceptions to that. You're still going to have to follow the reach ranges, the clear for space, all of those. And if you're updating and replacing a fountain with a touchless hydration device, then you'll still need to refer to those 2010 ADA standards.
I'll take the next one there, Hayden. So for water fountains that have the water bottle fill station, how do we accommodate ADA requirements? So, well, you need to adhere to the reach range requirements for the bottle filler. Place the bottle filler on the lower side fountain. If you have a set of high and low fountains, low side is always the priority. Most manufacturers already adhere to like a certain depth requirement for the fountain, so that if you're if you aren't reaching over the fountain, so that you aren't reaching over the fountain too far, which is what I'm trying to say, and which keeps the bottle filler and bottle tray where you set your bottle, if there is one, well within reach. So things like that all need to be done. We are again sharing the slides in the follow-up email, so you'll have access to all of those requirements. But there's quite a few steps you need to take to make sure that that's still required and accessible.
And then we actually had 2 cane skirt questions. Only one was included in this. If I'm not answering your question, I will get back to you in that follow-up email with the answer. And this question is, I never see cane skirts installed. Why not, and could facilities get in trouble for not using them? So lack of enforcement or ignorance to the necessity of cane skirts could be the issue at hand here. They are important devices that may not be used, but it is our responsibility to make this world as navigatable as possible for everyone. A facility can, in fact, get in trouble for not having cane skirts installed, and it just takes one person to know better and to contact the Department of Justice. If you yourself would like to contact them, you can visit the ADA.com for a full outline of how to file a complaint with them.
I think this next question, this has almost similar answer. If an accessible drinking fountain is not located in an alcove, but instead is located in a corridor, how do you address the horizontal projection that is created to meet the knee clearances? Now, in a corridor, the primary tool we use to ensure that this horizontal projection, that, you know what, that phrase is constantly, I'm just thinking of The Exorcist every time I say horizontal projection. Anywho, we utilize the cane skirt or the cane curb every time, and that's how we ensure that it is fully detectable, but double check your local requirements. The world is slowly moving towards an alcove requirement, and I think states still holding out will eventually change it. It just makes more sense. And then Hayden, you want to grab that last one?
Yeah, I'll take the last one. We're running out of time here, so thank you for everybody that's staying on with us. I'll go through this quickly. I work in a historically preserved building. Do we need to meet the ADA standards? The answer is yes. Historical buildings must be just as accessible as non-historic buildings, even though it is pretty fair to assume it wasn't designed or built as an accessible building. There are ways around this. There's a built-in consultation process outlined in the ADA for if you think that it may not be possible to make an area accessible without damaging or threatening that site's significance. You will need to contact the State Historic Preservation Office to help determine whether it can or should be done. And then that'll do it for our Q&A, Justin.
That's cool. So 24 to 48 hours after this presentation, you'll get all of these things in an email. Again, if you're going to be at ASPE, come say hi. We would love to see you. But all of this stuff will be coming in a follow-up email. The CEU instructions will be in that email. So hold on for that email and we'll get you taken care of. That's it for the webinar. Thank you for everyone for attending. Everyone here at Haas, and especially Hayden and I, are really appreciative of your support and attendance. We very well might get pats on the back right after this, and we love our back pats. So the follow-up email will be sent out soon with the questions that were submitted and, of course, answered by yours truly. Additional tools and CEU credit instructions, of course, as I explained. Please utilize the contact information on the page. If you have any questions at all, our customer service team consists of top-notch safety and hydration gurus. So visit hosco.com and you can take advantage of the live chat function to communicate with our team. If you need anything at all, please take what you've learned today, go forth, share this information. Remember to be champions for compliance and accessibility. And thank you very much for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody that stayed on with us. We only went 5 minutes over this time, so we are getting better. Thank you.